The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. As this hearing is being conducted virtually, we must address a few housekeeping matters. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen showing your remaining time. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind the member speaking that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time the hearing is called to order, in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to members who were not present when the hearing was called to order until every member present has had a first round. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Now, with that business out of the way, I will welcome everyone to the first Department of Homeland Security Subcommittee hearing of the 117th Congress. I particularly want to welcome our new members, Ms. Underwood, Mr. Quigley, and Ms. Hanson. Welcome also to today's witnesses, Acting Director Wales and Executive Assistant Director Goldstein of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I will make my opening statement brief to maximize time for questions. Acting Director Wales, you've been asked to step into an interim role as CISA Director, and we very much appreciate your service in this capacity. We have spoken about some of the recent challenges you and CISA face, and I want to reaffirm my commitment to helping you address them. The SolarWinds incident, a water treatment facility attack in Florida, and most recently, the compromise of Microsoft Exchange servers demonstrate that cybersecurity breaches are no longer isolated incidents. Networks are an emerging battlefield for both the public and private sectors. In the case of the SolarWinds incident, it took far too long to become aware that a foreign adversary had infiltrated federal civilian agency networks and infiltrated sensitive data. I am deeply concerned about how long it will take to learn the full extent of that compromise. And we are just beginning to learn about the impact of the Microsoft Exchange server intrusion. It is also unnerving how easy it was for a hacker to manipulate the control systems of the Florida treatment plant, increasing the amount of lie to levels that could have led to tragedy if a watchful supervisor at the plant hadn't noticed it in time. It is clear that we need to be investing much more in preventing, mitigating, and responding to cyber intrusions and attacks. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan includes significant funding to quickly improve the federal civilian cybersecurity posture, including $650 million for CISA. I look forward to hearing more from you on that topic today and on CISA's overall vision for modernizing our approach to cybersecurity. I would now like to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as always, it's a pleasure to work with you and yours in this subcommittee and on the full committee as well. Welcome, Acting Director Wales and Executive Assistant Director Goldstein. and thank you for joining us today as we look into ways to help modernize cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. First off, I know that we are here to identify problems and hopefully to come to agreement on some recommended areas for improvement in the government's protection of and response to cyber attacks. But first, let me take this opportunity to address that the scope of this hearing is not just to critique the work that you and the men and women at CISA have done to this point. With limited resources at your disposal, you have done a tremendous job, and I thank you. It is unfortunate that the world of cybersecurity is almost a thankless job, where in a best case scenario, all of your work allows government operations and agencies to continue unhindered, and that all your hard work goes almost completely unnoticed. And at worst, only your shortcomings are brought up after a major attack occurs. So please pass on our thanks to your workforce and let them know that we appreciate their efforts. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, nation-state actors with access to significant funds and resources have found a way to thwart our best protections and exploit our vulnerabilities, as we have seen from the Russian-backed SolarWinds attack and the much more recent China attack based on Microsoft Exchange servers. We have learned from these attacks that our adversaries are not only aware of our capabilities, but they are shrewd and cunning enough to go around them, exploiting our weaknesses and taking advantage of our vulnerabilities in real time, almost completely undetected. The cyber world is certainly a challenging one, whose vulnerabilities and shortcomings are not always readily apparent. Given the speed at which technology advances and the skills and abilities of bad actors with it, we must ensure that we are doing everything we can to keep up with new advancements, allowing ourselves the ability to both better recognize our shortcomings and better protect, identify, and respond to any future attacks. I look forward to your testimony on CISA's recommendations for improvements and ensuing an ensuing conversation on how to best protect our cyber infrastructure moving forward. Thank you for being here. I look forward to your testimony. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Acting Director Wales, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your oral summary.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairwoman DeLauro, Chairwoman Roybal-Allard, and Ranking Member Fleischman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's perspectives on modernizing the federal civilian approach to cybersecurity. If we needed any reminder of the significance of the cyber threats we face to our national and economic security, the last 3 months, and indeed the last week, should serve as a warning. We must invest in and focus on modernizing our cybersecurity and network infrastructure in order to truly defend today and secure tomorrow. CISA leads the nation's efforts to advance the cybersecurity, physical security, and resilience of our critical infrastructure. We share information and enable operational collaboration between the federal government, state and local governments, the private sector, international partners, and law enforcement, intelligence, and defense communities. This role has proven invaluable in managing recent cyber incidents, and I cannot understate how important collective defense is for cybersecurity. But we also know that there is a lot more work that needs to be done. Today, we'll focus on 2 recent significant cybersecurity incidents. First, the exploitation of Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities disclosed last week, and second, the supply chain compromise the federal government was alerted to in December 2020. Starting with the Exchange vulnerabilities. On March 2nd, CISA, the NSA, Microsoft, and Velexity disclosed previously unknown vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange products. Through CISA's coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, our organization helped all partners ensure that vulnerability information and mitigation actions were quickly shared broadly. On March 3rd, CISA issued Executive Emergency Directive 2102, requiring federal civilian departments and agencies to investigate, patch, and if necessary, disconnect vulnerable products from their network. This directive reflects our determination that these vulnerabilities pose unacceptable risks to federal networks and require emergency action. CISA is already aware of widespread exploitation of the vulnerabilities, and trusted partners have observed malicious actors using these vulnerabilities to gain access to targeted organizations in the United States and globally. Importantly, once an adversary gains access to a Microsoft Exchange server, they can access and control an enterprise network even after the vulnerabilities are patched. And malicious exploitation could be conducted by actors with various motivations, from stealing information to executing ransomware attacks or physically damaging connected infrastructure. CISA has stood up CISA.gov/ED2102 as a consolidated resource and for a mechanism for all of our information on this vulnerability. And we're using all of our forums to share this information quickly and broadly with our partners. Switching to the supply chain compromise. Late last year, CISA became aware of a broad cyber intrusion campaign largely associated with the supply chain compromise of SolarWinds Orion network management software. Nearly 18,000 entities were potentially exposed to the malicious SolarWinds software. CISA estimates that a much smaller number were compromised when the threat actor activated a malicious backdoor they had installed in the SolarWinds product and moved into an exposed network. Once inside the network, the actor was able to use their privileged access to abuse the authentication mechanisms, the systems that control trust and manage identities, ultimately allowing them to access and exfiltrate email and other data from compromised networks and Microsoft Office 365 cloud environments. The primary objective of the threat actor in this campaign appears to be gaining access to sensitive but unclassified communications and to identify additional opportunities to compromise IT supply chains. CISA's work in response to this campaign falls under 4 primary lines of effort. 1, scoping the campaign. 2, sharing information and detections. 3, supporting short-term remediation. And 4, providing guidance and assistance in long-term network recovery. These lines of effort are the framework around which we think about our response to any cyber incident. We continue to work this campaign aggressively. Just yesterday, we rolled out a new website that consolidates information and resources on best practices for remediating compromised systems and preparing federal departments and agencies for long-term actions to build more secure, resilient networks. Before I close, I want to address a more fundamental question. What does this all mean? Both the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities and the SolarWinds campaign highlight the lengths to which sophisticated adversaries will go to compromise our networks. They will use never-seen-before techniques, exquisite tradecraft, zero-day vulnerabilities to defeat our current cybersecurity architecture. Knowing that, we must raise our game. We need modern cybersecurity governance and capabilities. We need cybersecurity tools and services that provide us a better chance of detecting the most sophisticated attacks. And we need to rethink our approach to managing cybersecurity across 101 federal civilian executive branch agencies. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this important subject. And I will now turn the discussion over to CISA's newly appointed Cybersecurity Division Executive Assistant Director, Eric Goldstein, to talk about the direction we are headed, the capabilities we urgently need, and what you can do to help.
Thank you, Acting Director. Chairwoman DeLauro, Chairwoman Roybal-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, thank you for the chance to speak with you and the committee today. This is my first hearing before the committee in my new capacity as Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity within CISA. I'd like to commend the committee first and foremost for focusing on this urgent national security threat. I look forward to partnering with the committee to ensure that our nation has the capabilities and resources to address rapidly increasing cybersecurity risk. Acting Director Wales provided an overview of recent incidents affecting public and private entities of all types. These incidents reflect a need to strengthen our nation's cyber defenses, invest in new capabilities, and begin to fundamentally change how we think about cybersecurity. Even as CISA responds to and mitigates the impact of these immediate incidents, we're looking ahead to ensure that CISA is appropriately postured to defend today and secure tomorrow. To this end, we're focused on urgent improvements across 4 areas of strategic growth. First, we must increase CISA's visibility into cybersecurity risks across the federal civilian executive branch and, where feasible, across non-federal entities. Second, we must expand CISA's incident response capacity. Third, we must improve our ability to analyze large volumes of cybersecurity information to rapidly identify emerging threats and direct timely mitigation. And fourth, but perhaps strategically most importantly, we must drive adoption of defensible networks, including progressing towards zero trust environments, where we assume that networks are compromised and we focus on protecting the users and assets therein. Returning to our key priority of operational visibility, we must increase and improve our insight into federal agencies' cloud environments and to endpoints, the servers and computers that agencies use to conduct their daily business. This is critically important during COVID-19, as the federal workforce has moved to increase remote work, a trend that we expect to continue, and concomitant increase in the use of cloud computing. To achieve this goal, we must provide agencies with detection tools and build our ability to analyze data deriving therefrom. While no organization can prevent every cyber intrusion, increased visibility will let us detect and respond to incidents more quickly, thereby limiting harm to victim organizations. As we expand our visibility, we will also inherently detect more cybersecurity incidents. To this end, we must further develop our incident response capacity to hunt for threats on federal networks and provide urgent assistance to compromised entities. While we are effectively responding to incidents today, our resources must be fortified to ensure that we can meet demand in the future. Going forward, we must shift to a persistent threat hunting model in which CISA continuously searches for malicious activity across partner networks as authorized by the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act. In addition to increasing our incident response capacity, we must also develop and refine our analytic capabilities so that we can analyze cybersecurity data and more rapidly identify risks across the executive branch. And lastly, over the long term, we must facilitate adoption of more defensible networks, including by offering shared services to federal agencies to raise the baseline of cybersecurity across the executive branch, and providing agencies with tools and guidance to move to zero trust principles, where again, we presume that network perimeters can be compromised and we focus on protecting the critical assets within each network. We deeply appreciate Congress's consideration of additional funding to address these priorities, which are urgently needed for CISA to provide foundational capabilities across the federal civilian executive branch. These investments critically should be considered a down payment for the sustained effort required to improve and modernize federal civilian cybersecurity over the long term. It's now more critical than ever to urgently focus on securing the federal civilian government and responding quickly when a compromise occurs. By enhancing our visibility into agency networks, moving towards a posture of proactive hunting, and deploying more defensible network architectures, we can most effectively ensure that the federal government can provide the critical services upon which the American people depend. Thank you again for the chance to speak with you. We look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. And before we go to questions, I understand that the chairwoman of the full committee is here and would like to ask if she has any opening comments that she would like to make before we go to questions.
What I will do, Madam Chair, thank you very, very much, but I will submit my opening remarks for the record, and then we'll move to questions. So thank you very, very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
So SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange servers is what I'd like to talk about right now. It has been 3 months since we first learned about the significant supply chain cyber incident involving SolarWinds Orion software, but many questions still remain. And I know that you and your team have been working tirelessly to address this problem, and that you share this responsibility with the FBI, ODNI, the NSA, US Cybercom, and your private sector partners, and the impacted agencies and companies. Unfortunately, as was mentioned just last week, we learned about another set of compromises associated with vulnerabilities in on-premises Microsoft Exchange servers. In the case of SolarWinds incident, please describe how the adversary was able to access our networks and infiltrate data and information for months, if not longer, without being detected. And also, what information was removed from federal civilian work networks? And do we know whether the adversary did anything other than steal information, attempt to manipulate or delete information, or otherwise alter our systems and networks?
Sure. Thank you, Chairwoman. What I would say is that the actor in this case used extremely sophisticated techniques to bypass the security that is in place at agencies, as well as the significant number of private sector companies that were compromised as part of the campaign. By executing a supply chain attack, by compromising the SolarWinds product and putting the back door inside of one of their legitimate patches, that bypasses all of the normal traditional perimeter security that is deployed to protect agencies. And so it was a trusted patch. It was installed by network operators. And because of the nature of SolarWinds products, that they have broad administrative rights, they're usually configured to have broad administrative rights to networks, that gave the actor access to the network and allowed them to escalate their privileges in ways that we could not see. I think that, as Eric highlighted, this highlights the need for us to have better insights and visibility inside of networks. Conducting security at the edge on the perimeter is increasingly lacks the ability to detect the more sophisticated type of attacks, which are only going to take place on individual workstations, on individual servers. And that's why we're pushing for this increase in visibility down inside of networks. But to your larger question on what they stole and whether they did anything else, we continue to believe this was largely an espionage operation where they were collecting information, largely based on Microsoft Office 365 email for agency personnel. In many cases, that was extremely targeted. There was usually only a couple of dozen individuals at an agency that were targeted as part of this campaign. And we have no evidence at this time that the actor did anything except steal information.
Okay. In the case of the more recent Microsoft Exchange server compromises, were federal agencies compromised? And if so, what is the impact and what steps is CISA taking to help agencies recover?
So we are still in the early days of the investigation of exploitation of Microsoft Exchange Server. As the acting director noted, CISA issued an emergency directive which required all federal civilian agencies to both analyze their networks for indications of compromise and to immediately patch. We have seen outstanding responses to that directive, and now the vast majority of Microsoft Exchange servers have been mitigated across the federal civilian executive branch. We are working with individual agencies to assess the results of their forensic analysis. At this point in time, there are no federal civilian agencies that are confirmed to be compromised by this campaign. However, CISA is working with individual agencies to assess the results of their analysis, and this is an evolving campaign with new information coming in by the hour.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also wanted to acknowledge and thank the full committee chair, Chair DeLauro, for joining us today. Thank you, Madam Chair, for being with us as well. In the supply chain attack by Russian state actors, we first learned about the compromise in early December, but have since determined that the compromise itself began many months prior to that. Without getting into why it took so long for us to learn what we had compromised, I want to get to another underlying issue. Two questions. Assuming we knew that a supply chain attack was a significant vulnerability, how long have we known this, and what was done previously, if anything, to address this concern? And my other question would be, more importantly, how can we better understand where our vulnerabilities are and, once identified, ensure we are addressing them? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ranking Member. I'll take the first part of that question and then allow Executive Assistant Director Goldstein to take on the second. I would say that there was a substantial amount of work done on supply chain security over the last several years, including several executive orders focused on improving information and communications technology supply chains. There was the passage of the Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Council, the FASC, that was stood up for federal agencies at the civilian, in the national security systems, in the intelligence community to work together to assess supply chain risks and take action to remove supply chain potential dangerous supply chains out of federal networks. But there is still more work to be done, and I think the SolarWinds campaign highlights where trusted patches from otherwise companies that have a strong business are in need of. We needed different approaches to work with them. How do we ensure that when the federal government takes on software from a supplier, that software is free of malicious backdoors, and that's going to take more work. It's also, as EAD Goldstein said, one of the key principles that we need to put into place is the zero trust mindset, where even if something comes into your network that might be compromised, you've built enough protections around it, you've segmented your network properly, where the introduction of that piece of compromised code will have minimal impacts. So we're working this on a number of fronts, but supply chain attacks are one of the most challenging to address, and it's going to take a lot more creative thinking to fully solve it.
Thank you. And I would just add to that very thorough answer. We need to confront this challenge on any number of fronts. And so the supply chain compromise that we saw with the SolarWinds incident is one way that we know that sophisticated adversaries can compromise victim networks. And we need to urgently work through entities like the Federal Acquisition Security Council that the director mentioned to make sure that we are raising the bar for software assurance and supply chain integrity across the civilian executive branch. And there's more work that we can assuredly do there. At the same time, it's important to appreciate that, as the acting director noted, this was truly an exquisite attack perpetrated by a sophisticated actor that put significant amounts of time and resources. And so we need to adopt a principle that in cybersecurity is called the kill chain, in which we are trying to prevent an intrusion at multiple phases. So even if we are unable to prevent the supply chain compromise, we're detecting the lateral movement across a network, or we are detecting the escalation of privileges when the adversary attempts to compromise the authentication systems that are used to gain access to different assets within a network, and on down the line. And so we need robust layers of defense within each federal civilian executive branch network, with data from those layers coming back to CISA so we can identify and correlate security trends across the executive branch and identify these sorts of deeply mature intrusions before they're able to endure for months on end and cause lasting damage.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mindful of my limited time, I'll be brief with this and ask for a brief response. In regard to the existing vulnerabilities and finding ways to mitigate them, can you describe in layman's terms the vulnerabilities of the Microsoft Exchange attack, along with how long we've known about this weakness? Very quickly. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'll do my best to move quickly. CISA was made aware of this vulnerability along with Microsoft on March 2nd, last Tuesday. As noted, we moved urgently to issue a directive and direct remediation of the vulnerability. This was a previously unknown flaw in Microsoft Exchange Server that allows an adversary to use a combination of vulnerabilities to gain remote access to the server and execute remote commands, potentially exfiltrate data. We are now seeing adversaries deploy what are known as web shells, which is a very small bit of code that the adversary can use the vulnerability to deploy on a Microsoft Exchange server. These web shells can be very hard to detect and allow the adversary to execute additional commands or take further actions to steal information or launch more destructive types of attacks. So this was a previously unknown flaw in Microsoft Exchange Server that was identified to CISA and to Microsoft last week and urgently directed to be remediated immediately thereafter.
Thank you, Director Goldstein, and I yield back.
Chair DeLauro.
Thank you very much. A great deal of effort and resources have gone into developing the National Cybersecurity Protection System, also known as Einstein. This is a perimeter defense tool for federal civilian networks, yet our adversaries do not appear to be deterred by it. Why is Einstein not more effective at keeping our adversaries off of federal networks? And a follow-up question would be, with the changing technology landscape and the increasing sophistication of our adversaries' techniques, how does CISA's cybersecurity strategy need to change? And what in particular does the future of Einstein look like? Why is it not more effective at keeping our adversaries off the federal networks?
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. It's a very important one. It is a truism of cybersecurity that our defensive technologies need to adapt as the threat environment changes and in the way that we use technology changes. Einstein was originally designed, as the acting director noted, as a perimeter defense program, meaning that it provides intrusion detection and prevention at the point where agency networks meet the open internet. Over time, what we have found is largely because of the increased use of encryption for traffic entering and exiting federal networks, which of course has its own privacy and security benefits, the Einstein technology that was reasonably designed to address risks in technology a decade ago has grown somewhat stale over time and now does not provide the visibility that CISA needs. For this reason, CISA is urgently moving our detection capabilities from that perimeter layer into agency networks to focus on these endpoints, the servers and workstations where we're seeing adversary activity today. This is consistent with leading trends in the cybersecurity industry as adopted by public and private organizations of all types. We already have pilots in place to precipitate this important transition, and with funding under consideration by Congress, we will rapidly accelerate this transition from a perimeter defense construct to a construct where we are in real time identifying threat activity within agency networks, which is where the visibility still remains.
What's your timing on this transition?
So the transition is underway now. We have, these tools are called endpoint detection and response. We have pilots underway with certain agencies at this point. With funding requested from Congress, we'll be able to rapidly accelerate those pilots and deploy this kind of internal detection and prevention tooling within agency networks on a much faster timeframe.
Well, but I'm just saying, is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it 6 months? Is it, you know?
It will be iterative. We will be deploying over time. Certainly each month that goes by, we will cover more agencies. We can certainly come back with a conclusory date of when we'll think we'll have full coverage, but this is a scalable process where every month that goes by, there will be more agencies protected, which is of course why this funding is so urgent, so we can get started on this acceleration today.
So, ma'am, let me just add that the $650 million that is currently under consideration in the relief package is a down payment. It accelerates some of these efforts, but this is going to require sustained investment for both CISA as well as the agencies themselves. We want to ensure that as we increase this visibility, it's going to provide increased visibility to CISA to look across the entire .gov, and it will also increase the visibility for agencies themselves. And those agencies themselves are going to need additional resources to make sure that they can fully leverage the improved capabilities that we will be deploying. We want to make sure that their cybersecurity posture increases with ours so that the layers of defense that Eric talked about are solid.
Well, it's going to be important for us to know what the overall, I understand the relief package, but when you talk about sustained investment, it would be very good to get to the committee, to the chair, the ranking member, et cetera. What you anticipate is the cost for this? And again, how quickly? Because every month that goes by, we are at risk for, the last 2 events that we're talking about. One is March 2nd of last week. So imperative. Maybe I can ask a quick question. here. This is about the impact of election security on federal cyber security, because there has been some conversation about this election security in 2020 may have distracted the agency's focus away from cybersecurity. Did CISA's election security efforts and focus contribute to a lack of resources or situational awareness that made us more vulnerable to cybersecurity breaches? Were those efforts a factor in allowing the SolarWinds intrusion to go undetected for so long? My time ran out. Madam Chair, if I can beg your indulgence just for this.
Madam Chair, you can take all the time you want.
Thank you.
Ma'am, let me address that first by saying the work that we did in concert with our interagency partners to protect our democratic institutions is not a distraction. It is a core mission of the agency, a priority work that continues to this day. And let me address it secondly by saying our agency has a broad mission. As I covered in my opening remarks, we work across cyber, physical, communications. We're building resilience and heightening and enhancing security. We have to have the ability to work multiple problems. Even in the midst of the election season, we were still dealing with other cybersecurity incidents in the federal government, at state and local governments, in the private sector. I do not believe that the election distracted us. If anything, it has further honed our capabilities. It has improved our coordination within the interagency, and it has made the U.S. government cybersecurity mission more efficient and more effective. And we're just going to try to build on that going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. And I yield back, and I thank the gentlewoman for indulging the time. Appreciate it.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wales, if the Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation Program, which is government-wide cybersecurity program, aims to provide capability to identify cybersecurity risks, prioritize those risks based upon potential impact, and to mitigate the most significant problems. Now, the program was designed for phases, as I understand. Phase one was basically asset management. Phase two was to identify and assess that management, access management. And then phase three was, let's see, a data protection phase. And then phase four was different agencies were going to be incentivized to adopt CDM capabilities, which we would fund for up to, DHS would fund a base year and then one optional year. Can you, and CISA said that this was foundational. Now that tells me it's pretty darn important. Can you tell me how many agencies are now actively moving through the Continuous Diagnostic Mitigation Program?
So
how many are phase one and how many are requesting phase one level?
So I'll give you a little bit of a high level answer, and then I'm going to ask Eric to talk about kind of how we envision the program moving forward, since CDM is going to be critical for a number of the capabilities that EAD Goldstein outlined we will be deploying, including the endpoint detection and response tools. CDM provides, and every agency is currently, every federal civilian executive branch agency is participating in CDM, and has, and I'd say phase one is almost fully deployed. There's a couple of parts of a couple of agencies that continue to deploy asset management tools, but we need that. Agencies need to understand what's on their network. They need to understand who's on their network. They need to understand what's the current patch level, where are current vulnerabilities in their network, because the more sophisticated techniques, the endpoint detection, the zero trust architectures, assume you have a comprehensive understanding of what your network looks like and the potential vulnerabilities on it. So we could not move to these more sophisticated tools and capabilities without getting that foundation in place. CDM has built that foundation. The reason why agencies today can respond so quickly to our emergency directives is that CDM has provided them that level of insight into their network and the ability to look at the individual objects on their network and know where they are, what patch level they are, and where they need to take remediative action. So I'd ask Eric just to give you a little bit of a highlight about what the next steps are there as we move into phases 3 and 4.
Oh, okay. So but if I could, so Director, you're telling me that all executive branch agencies are in CDM at least to phase 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that every agency has largely completed phase 1. Like I said, there's a couple of places. Most agencies are in phase 2 or completing phase 2. And then we are actually, some of the funding for FY22 and 23 begins to fund phase 3 and phase 4 efforts across the federal civilian executive branch.
Okay, I'd like to hear from Eric then.
Yes, sir, of course. So it's useful to think of CDM as providing 3 foundational capabilities for federal civilian cybersecurity. The first is it is a mechanism for CISA to provide fundamental security tools to all federal civilian agencies. And as the acting director noted, as we move to provision of the next generation of cybersecurity tools, including endpoint detection and response tools, including tools that allow adoption of these zero trust principles that focus on protecting. Please, sir.
Can I interrupt you just 1 minute?
Yes, sir.
So these fundamental detection tools, are these also those, you know, we mentioned Einstein as kind of a border security, the interior security tools to look inside the systems, that not at the portals, not at the intrusion points. Are those tools, have they been developed, and is CDM moving that forward?
Yes, sir. So they have absolutely been developed. And I do think it's useful to think of the National Cybersecurity Protection System, or Einstein, and the CDM program not as separate offerings, but really as part of CISA's cohesive and holistic strategy to protect federal civilian agencies. And so NCPS and CDM really work hand in glove to protect all levels of the network against cybersecurity risks. And again, both of those programs must transition to address changes in the risk and technology environment. Now, moving to CDM for a moment, along with providing the mechanism to provide agencies with many of these modern security tools that we need for layered defense, CDM is also the mechanism through which agencies are able to get visibility into their own risks, which is critically important for agency CIOs to understand their environment and the risks they're in, and then for CISA to get cross-government visibility into risk trends, which will then, the emergency directive that we just issued is a canonical example. When we issue these kinds of directives, CDM, particularly as it matures, gives us the ability to look into agency networks and understand the pervasiveness of a given risk, and then drive very focused, timely remediation.
Thank you. Very, very good answer. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, Mr. Rubensberger?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First thing, I want to talk about just a macro issue, and that is where we are in cybersecurity. When I was on the Intelligence Committee, I represent NSA also, so I've focused a lot in cybersecurity. And we are, NSA is very good as it relates to Russia, China, and those issues. But we moved to CISA. I think CISA has been giving a task that they just can't do the job that they need to do because of lack of resources and lack of personnel. But I do want to say this, the personnel that's there is doing a great job, and they just can't do it all. And I really was upset when you had a small team that was working well, and our former president fired the Chris Krebs, the director, because he spoke truth to power. We can't have any politics involved in this issue. It's very serious. I authored Section 1745 of the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act, and that requires CISA to conduct a force structure assessment. Very important. This assessment is in part intended to address whether CISA has the personnel, material, and facilities to achieve its mission. I strongly support this review, which is particularly timely as press reports highlight the cyber defenders are stretched thin to deal with a combination of SolarWinds-related malware and the newly released Microsoft Exchange server vulnerabilities. I'm deeply disturbed when I hear that state and local governments, school systems, even hospitals may have had bad actors on their networks for months as they wait for scarce incident response teams to help them clean up the networks. You know, other than nuclear weapons, I believe that the cyber issue is going to really be maybe the next war if we have one, and that and space. And I think it's time that we really have this assessment and that we have to really look at where we are and what we're doing. Now, NSA is very good, but we're all concerned about the defense issues that have occurred. And because NSA has no jurisdiction in the United States, and there are a lot of privacy issues, which we need to adhere to. But I think we have to look at the whole big picture about what we're going to do to protect our country from the cyber attacks that we've had now. And this is going to continue. It's going to get worse before it gets better. You know, it's unfortunate, I think, in this area of cybersecurity, if there may be 15 members that I know that really focus on cybersecurity, that's a lot. So I really hope we can make this a priority with the help of our leadership on the Appropriations Committee to move forward with this assessment and decide where we need to go, give the money to where we need to go, because the people that exist in leadership right now on this committee, you know, Mr. Goldstein, I mean, Mr. Wales, they're working hard, but they sure need a lot of help and a lot of resources. Two real quick questions. Do you believe there is a need for more inherent incident response capability at CISA to assist federal and state and local partners? And the second question, how does the American Rescue Plan request support expanding this capability?
Sure. So let me just say at the outset that this agency has benefited tremendously from strong support in Congress, both parties, both houses, and we want to make sure that we maintain that support by our openness, our transparency, and the work of our agency. I would say without a doubt, to accomplish the scale of the mission that we have, we need more resources. As EAD Goldstein laid out during his opening, we are asking for it, and in particular in the area of expanding our incident response capabilities to allow us to offer more persistent hunt capabilities for the .gov and free up our incident response resources to deal with the wide array of cyber incidents that we face on a routine basis. But the money in the ARA is a down payment on the scale of capabilities, tools, and resources we need. Sir, work on the workforce assessment is already underway, and we look forward to briefing you later this year on the outcomes of that. Eric, anything else you want to add?
No, I would just reiterate that, you know, we do see the need for incident response capacity, again, in those two areas, both to meet demand from federal and non-federal partners, and also critically to move to this model where we are not only reactively responding to incidents that have already occurred, but move into this more persistent threat hunting model where we continuously search for adversaries that may have compromised American networks.
You go back. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Wales and Acting Director Wales and Mr. Goldstein for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to ask you a few questions about this as a new member to the committee. So as we look at this, you've used words like this was an exquisite attack, an espionage operation. How confident are you that you understand the tradecraft and what was actually employed in this attack, this cyber attack on us, and we can use that to ensure we're preventing future attacks? That would be my first question. And then the second is you referenced specifically the patching procedure and how they were able to access data even after patched. Are you confident that does that data have any vulnerability now? Can it still be accessed, or have you patched that on our end so we make sure that that vulnerability no longer exists?
Sure. So I'll take the first question, and then I'll let Eric handle the portion on the Microsoft Exchange. So for SolarWinds, we understand the tactics that the adversary used to compromise most networks. Part of what CISA does is It takes information in, it looks to identify the tactics and the techniques that the adversary use. We then push out that information either in the form of alerts so that the broader cybersecurity community can look for that activity. In some cases, we deploy tools that actually allow that agencies or private companies can use to look for evidence on their networks. We had our cloud forensics team working on Christmas Eve to deploy a tool to look for evidence of the compromise of the Microsoft cloud environment. Just this week, we've released a new tool starting with federal agencies to look for evidence in the SolarWinds compromise of the adversary moving laterally off of the SolarWinds device into the network. So we are constantly looking for ways in which we can push out that kind of detection techniques to the benefit of all network defenders. And that's a learning process. Every new incident we see could be a slightly new tactic that the adversary uses, but we have multiple ways of getting that information out. All of the current tactics and techniques that we are aware of have been shared broadly with our public and private sector partners. Eric, can you talk about Exchange?
Certainly. As to the second question regarding the Microsoft Exchange server vulnerability, we are driving urgent progress across federal civilian agencies to patch that vulnerability. As noted, over nearly 90% of said instances have already been mitigated. Microsoft has also helpfully released a tool that allows victim organizations to assess if they have been compromised as part of this campaign. And we have put out accompanying alerts and guidance for network defenders to understand their risk, identify if they have been both exposed and compromised, and then take urgent remediation action as necessary. We are further providing ongoing consultative assistance to agencies to help them understand their risk and make sure that they've taken the appropriate steps to minimize their vulnerability to this campaign.
And then one other question I would have as a follow-up to that, you talk about our adversaries, and in this case, you keep mentioning the actor. Who is the actor that is responsible for this attack? If you can say that for the record, because obviously when we're talking about a major espionage operation and preventing them in the future, these bad actors all over the world are not going to pause, and they continue to assault us every day. So who is this actor that we're referring to?
So in the SolarWinds case, the U.S. government has said that this campaign is likely of Russian origin, but the U.S. government continues to assess that situation and will provide additional information to Congress and the American people soon. On the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, the U.S. government has not attributed that to an actor yet. Microsoft did in its blog tie it back to Chinese state actors. That being said, we are already seeing multiple actors now utilize those vulnerabilities. So it is no longer just a single actor exploiting the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities. There are multiple threat actors who are going to use that vulnerability to steal information or conduct more significant and potentially damaging and disruptive cyber incidents. And so we are at a race against that threat actor community to make sure that we patch and secure as many systems as possible before more disruptive attacks begin to emerge.
And you talk about the persistent threat model in going forward and dealing with these. Can you elaborate just very quickly? I know I'm running out of time, but just on what that's going to look like, as you're planning, for the next year, the next 3 to 5 years. Just a quick perspective on that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. So the way that much incident response and threat hunting works historically is we would begin the response or hunting phase only when triggered by a compromise, by a possible breach. What we want to move to is a paradigm where CISA is able to continuously assess security data from agencies on an ongoing basis for evidence of compromise, utilizing both known and potential indicators of compromise, including advanced analytic techniques, so that we can get ahead of the adversary, and the moment that they intrude, we have a higher likelihood of catching them versus waiting until, for example, the adversary makes a mistake and then we trigger an incident response. So our goal is to move to leftward in our ability to rapidly detect intrusions that do occur.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Ms. Underwood.
Well, thank Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling today's hearing on this important topic. The vulnerabilities in our networks, our federal networks that we've been discussing today are urgent, and I'm grateful that the President has prioritized funding for CISA to address these and other pressing needs through the American Rescue Plan. But our state and local governments have also been targeted by attackers who've only grown bolder during the pandemic, and they lack the expertise and resources of a federal agency. Like my colleague, Mr. Price, and perhaps others on this committee, I represent constituents who've been directly impacted by such attacks on more than one occasion. In 2016, the personal information of 76,000 Illinoisans was accessed by Russian hackers who targeted the state's election infrastructure. And just last year, a school district in Crystal Lake, Illinois, was hit by a ransomware attack. Mr. Wales, can you elaborate on how the funding included in the American Rescue Plan will expand CISA's capacity to support organizations outside the federal government, and particularly how state and local governments will benefit from these investments?
Sure. So the majority of the funding in the American Rescue Act is focused on improving federal cybersecurity. That being said, the expansion in incident response resources for CISA will free up necessary capabilities to allow us to support more state, local, and private sector entities that are coming to us for support. And I think that that's critical. I would just add two other quick points. We completely agree with you. State and locals absolutely need more support. Secretary Mayorkas has talked about this. We need more investment in state and local cybersecurity, and we are eager to work with Congress on the right way of ensuring that kind of continued investment to bring state and locals up to a stronger baseline. I know from our work over the last 4 years on election security that we can make a lot of progress with the focused effort from the federal government with our state and local partners. And I think with congressional support, we'll be able to have that level of impact more broadly on state and local information infrastructure.
Great, thank you. One of the lessons, I'm sorry, did you have something else to add?
No.
Okay. One of the lessons I took away from the attack on the Illinois Board of Elections is that when our federal, state, and local infrastructure is so interconnected, we're only as strong as our weakest link. And that's why I think it's so important to take a whole government approach to modernizing our nation's cybersecurity. Mr. Wales, as we continue advancing and strengthening our federal network security, what steps should Congress take to ensure that our state and local governments don't get left behind?
Yeah, I don't think we have a specific proposal today. Already the department has taken action, for example, increasing the amount of money, the percentage of our Homeland Security grants that need to go to cybersecurity investments for our states and state and local communities. CISA is working closely with FEMA on the implementation of that. But in addition, we think that we need to identify additional mechanisms by which we can provide that level of support. And again, we're eager to work with Congress. We know there are proposals and drafts of legislation that we have seen that focus on that, including by provisioning grants or others. And we're eager to work with you on what that looks like.
Thank you. I want to shift gears and discuss how CISA is modernizing not only its work, but its workforce. We need the best and brightest minds tackling challenges facing our nation, and our success is going to rest on the ability to attract top talent who can bring diverse experiences and perspectives to bear on our biggest and toughest security problems. Mr. Wales, what percentage of CISA employees are women?
I believe currently roughly 35% of our workforce is women.
And what percentage of your employees identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color?
I do not actually have that statistic off the top of my head.
Can you get back to me, please?
Yes, absolutely. We'll get back to you on that.
And then what steps are you taking to diversify the agency's workforce, and what resources do you need to do that?
Sure. So this was a major focus of our deputy director during 2020, which we had dubbed our kind of year of diversity and inclusion. And we've taken a number of steps to increase our ability to recruit a diverse workforce. This included expanding recruitment in high schools, in minority serving institutions, women-focused events, and other groups where we thought we could increase our capacity to hire a diverse workforce. COVID introduced some challenges to that and slowed down our hiring across the board. But we're hoping as we move into 2021, with the ending of the pandemic, that we'll be able to accelerate a number of these efforts and really look forward to working with you on that. I think we're happy to come and provide a more detailed briefing on our workforce recruitment efforts, including our efforts on improving diversity.
And ma'am, if I may just add briefly, as the newly appointed head of our cybersecurity arm, this is unequivocally one of my top priorities. Diversity and inclusion is a national security issue, and it is an urgent imperative for us to have a cybersecurity workforce that reflects the diversity of this country. And you have my commitment that this will be one of our top priorities in the months and years to come.
Well, thank you both. Recruiting, retaining, and advancing diverse talent, all three are critically important. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Palacio.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to be back to doing the people's business. I think the Homeland Security Subcommittee is one of the most important committees in out of the full committee. We're tasked with protecting our homeland. There's many missions, there's many functions, there's many agencies that we have to deal with. Before coming to Approach, I had the pleasure and opportunity to serve on the House Armed Services Committee. And, you know, we had commandants, generals, secretaries of defense, and so on. And a popular question we've always would ask them would be, you know, what keeps you up at night? You know, what allows a 4-star general not to be able to sleep because he's worried about what's next? What is that next threat? Where is it going to come from? And how are we going to defend America? And, you know, we've heard varying responses over the years. China has been one that's pretty consistent, and obviously that's not going away. Russia, ISIS, even cyber. You know, cyber is very important to the defense of our homeland and the protection of our troops abroad. But the one thing that really stood out, and this was Admiral Mullins, he said our national debt. He said the greatest threat to America is our national debt. And as appropriators, I think we need to take that to heart, and we need to take that very seriously because we have limited resources, but unlimited wants. And the threats to America, they're not diminishing, they're growing. And they're getting bolder because they see an America and an American people that's fighting amongst ourselves. And they only have to watch C-SPAN or the nightly news to see that we are putting politics over the American people, over the defense of our homeland and our national security, and over sound and solid policy. So, Kate, you know, I'll stop with that. I just wanted to, that was on my heart this morning. But to Mr. Wells and Mr. Goldstein, you know, the number of attacks, if you could address, what are the number of attacks or engagements that we are seeing, especially in regards to critical infrastructure from either state or non-state actors, and to whatever amount you can reveal in an unclassified setting?
So it is a challenging question to answer, sir, because we know that our adversaries, nation states, and criminal groups are continuously attempting to compromise public and private entities of all types. What we have seen over the past few days, as reported in the media, around this Microsoft Exchange server campaign is an exemplar of this, where as soon as the vulnerability was revealed, we saw countless adversaries, sophisticated and not, attempted to compromise vulnerable entities. And so our focus really needs to be raising the bar of cybersecurity across this country, and then doing that in a risk-based way where additional protections are deployed based upon the criticality of a given organization. And so at CISA, we are deeply focused on ensuring that all organizations understand the basic protections they should adopt, and that those more critical organizations, whether federal agencies or private companies, understand that they are at increased risk and need to adopt a higher bar for cybersecurity controls.
Let me just add one point to that. One of the challenges in answering your question with more specificity is that we are entirely dependent upon the private sector voluntarily sharing information with us about compromises or potential compromises or attempts to compromise their networks. And I think we can see in the SolarWinds campaign, in the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability exploitation campaign, we don't know that at scale. We don't get that kind of information provided to us in a comprehensive way where we can see the picture of what the cyber risk we're facing. And in order for us to be as effective as possible, it requires us to understand what the adversary is doing so that we can protect everyone by sharing that information, by providing detections, by providing information on what the adversary's tactics are. And so the more that information is held by compromised private sector entities, the less we are able to protect everyone else. And so I think that is something that we are eager to work with Congress to see how that can be addressed.
Well, thank you both. I see my time is ticking down fairly quick. I do want to just leave with, I agree with Dutch. I think any external threat that we're going to be witnessing in the future is going to be precluded by cyber and possibly something happening in our space domain, and then to something maybe a little more conventional, probably not on the homeland, but where our allies and where our interests reside abroad. So listen, I appreciate the both of you. Tell your staff we appreciate them. You have a huge responsibility to be a part of the group protecting our homeland, and continue to let us know how we can source you to make sure that you're efficient and effective. And lastly, Madam Chair, if we could maybe in the near future and maybe do a follow-up in a classified setting, I think that would be very beneficial and eye-opening for our members. And so thank you both. Keep up the great work.
Great. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I appreciate the director and the assistant director appearing today, and appreciate the good work you're doing. You've led the nation through the most secure election in American history. You're continuing to respond to the SolarWinds incident with multiple on multiple government fronts, and you're collaborating with government and private sector partners who are experiencing more and more frequent malicious activity. I want to ask you something about your Homeland Security Department efforts with FEMA, with their expanded responsibilities in this area. But I first want to quickly revisit the topic my colleague Ms. Underwood raised, because North Carolina too has been home to some shocking intrusions at the local government level, something we've not experienced and didn't expect to experience. Chatham County in my district was hit with a ransomware attack that encrypted much of the county's network infrastructure, associated business systems. It's an ongoing problem. Just a few weeks ago, the county discovered sensitive files posted on the dark web, including employee personnel records, eviction notices, law enforcement investigative documents. Pretty serious breach and quite serious, quite sensitive information. Chatham County is admirably working through this attack, but as you indicated, many state and local governments don't have anything like the resources they need to deal with this. So if you could just elaborate on your answer to Ms. Underwood, what kind of assistance do you perceive is most important for government at this level? What kind of resources, technical assistance, help in assessing the security situation, and are there specific funding implications for this aspect of your mission?
Yes, sir. So we again deeply recognize the grave risk that are facing our state, local, tribal, and territorial governments from cybersecurity threats, particularly ransomware, as you noted, sir, is an epidemic currently affecting far too many municipalities and other jurisdictions in this country. CISO recently initiated a ransomware awareness campaign to drive adoption of best practices among public and private organizations to reduce the risk of ransomware affecting entities. And we'd encourage all organizations to look at the ransomware materials on the CISA.gov webpage and avail themselves of the recommendations therein. It is also the case that CISA is available to provide assessment, guidance, consultative assistance, and as needed incident response services to state, local, tribal, and territorial entities who are impacted by a damaging cyber attack. I would encourage any such entities to contact CISA and acquire both about our proactive resources to help assess an organization's capacity and maturity, and then if an incident does occur, to request help then as well. And I would just note that CISA also has regional personnel with cybersecurity expertise deployed across the country who are available to assist our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners on site to walk through concerns and help figure out how those organizations can be made more secure.
Good, thank you. That's very helpful. Let me move to the FEMA question. We're going to follow this state and local support situation very, very closely. Let me move to the Secretary's announcement last month that the required minimum spend on cybersecurity for FEMA grant awards will increase from 5 to 7.5%. That's a $25 million increase. Crucial step toward accelerating improvements in state and local cybersecurity. Can you detail the support you plan to give, that you're being asked to give, that you will give to FEMA as they increase their cyber portfolio? In his announcement, the Secretary also announced that he's thinking of implementing a new grant program in CISA to support state and local governments, including to combat the epidemic of ransomware. What about those possible new grant opportunities?
Yes. Question. CISA today provides robust subject matter expertise to FEMA to support the evaluation of grant proposals for cybersecurity expenditures. We were delighted by the Secretary's decision to expand the mandatory cost allocation to cybersecurity investments. I think that the $25 million that will result from that decision will significantly improve cybersecurity maturity across recipient organizations, and CISA will continue serving in our subject matter expert role to ensure that grant applicants are making best use of those resources to improve their cybersecurity maturity. As to the second question, we certainly agree, sir, both with you and Ms. Underwood, that the level of investment in cybersecurity across our state and local entities must improve, and look forward to working with this committee and others on determining how CISA can help provide that much needed investment going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to be here, and want to thank both gentlemen for their testimony. Assistant Director Goldstein, in your testimony, you talked a little bit about NDAA authorities and the visibility issue. Section 1705 of the FY21 NDAA allows CISA to threat hunt on other agency networks. In other words, it empowers CISA to proactively search through security logs and other data for evidence of compromise by sophisticated actors. While I support this authority and understand it, I know that there's other approaches to implementing this language. CISA can either use an instrument on the networks of sister agencies to collect the data, or their departments can give CISA the access as you indicated on those logs. Can you talk a little bit about the approach that CISA is considering to implement this language? And of the approaches mentioned, which one would CISA prefer and why?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. You know, we deeply appreciate this authority provided in the NDAA for just the reason you note, that it gives CISA the flexibility in execution to determine which model makes the most sense for federal cybersecurity, or even which combination of models makes the most sense for federal cybersecurity. And so we are not seeing this as an either or proposition, but exactly as you noted, we are planning to deploy additional endpoint detection and response tools on federal networks that will allow us to continuously analyze for threat activity. We are also working with our federal partners to encourage agencies to aggregate security information in such a way that CISA is able to conduct continuous analytics on that sort of log data derived both from on-premises and cloud environments. And so our goal with this authority is to interpret it in a way that best advances our cybersecurity goals across the federal civilian enterprise. And as noted by several of the other members, our execution model of this authority will likely change over time as technology changes and as risks change. So our goal is to be able to detect adversary activity wherever it occurs. The model that we do so will undoubtedly change as required.
How would the funding requests for each of these approaches differ as you talk through that evolution and how it could change? What should we be mindful of when it comes to the funding requests that we could receive?
So I think there are three variables in the funding request along these lines that I think are apply to each of these models, but may differ in degree. And so the first will be the people, the trained expert security practitioners who understand the practice of threat hunting, which is a very specific expert discipline. And CISA has an extraordinary group of individuals who do this work today. We need more of those individuals. The second will be the tooling, the provision of tools and sensors to agencies that will allow us to collect this data wherever it may be, whether it's at the endpoint or in the cloud. And the third will be the analytic infrastructure to allow CISA to either run queries on data at the agency level or analyze that data wherever it may be and derive learnings therefrom that allow us to do this important work of identifying adversary activity. And so I think those three areas of investment may
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I appreciate that. Building off of Ms. Underwood and Mr. Price and their discussion about local coordination as well, can you just elaborate a little bit on that coordination level with FEMA? What could we I understand that subject matter experts and being available to localities, but how can we embed some of that coordination between you folks and FEMA?
Let me just clarify. It's when we talk about subject matter experts are a part of the review, it is not kind of ad hoc. It's a part of the review process. So all of the cybersecurity investment justifications that were submitted by states to support the cybersecurity under the cybersecurity investment umbrella were reviewed by subject matter experts within CISA in concert with FEMA to make sure that that was a true partnership to review the investments in the cybersecurity domain. But in addition, we also put out information up front and worked with a number of states who wanted our assistance as they were initially thinking through and beginning to craft investment justifications that were going to be submitted to FEMA as part of the grants process. That since we're now into year 2 of this cycle with these cybersecurity investment requirements, that process is getting even stronger with our embedded field-based personnel in states and cities across the country, providing that assistance to state administrative agencies and other cybersecurity experts at the state and local level who are involved in the investment justification grant writing process.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
I believe we have time to have a round 2. So I'd like to begin by going back to our funding response to the solar winds. As been mentioned, the American Rescue Plan includes a substantial funding infusion for federal IT modernization and cybersecurity, including the $650 million for CISA. One of the things that is concerning to me is that many federal Office 365 email accounts have only the most rudimentary security logging capabilities, which is necessary for cyber defenders to track malicious activity. It's also concerning that a significant portion of CISA's American Rescue Plan Act funding is slated to go to upgrading these licenses. Why isn't advanced security logging enabled by default on any of the federal cloud accounts that the government procures? And how much of that $650 million supplemental funding is currently planned for license upgrades to support logging? And I just want to add one more point to that question. Will CISA be issuing a directive to require agencies to procure licenses that require advanced security logging on cloud contracts? And if not, how do we fix this problem?
So CISA's strategic goal, broadly and with this funding, is to ensure that agency IT environments, whether on-premises or in the cloud, have the security built in that the American people would expect of their federal government. Now, an aspect to that, ma'am, as you note, is ensuring that cloud computing environments have logging, retention, and security controls that can reasonably be expected to detect adversary activity and that CISA can use to understand events when they do occur and respond accordingly. As part of our funding request, we do intend to develop a process to improve the level of cloud security across the federal government. One option that could be considered is the improvement of licenses with existing vendors. There are other options that could achieve a similar goal. And so our goal is strategically to ensure that federal agency data is secured wherever it sits, on-prem and in the cloud, and we are planning to take any possible course of action to achieve that goal, working, of course, with our partners in each agency, the Office of Management and Budget, and other entities across government.
I guess the next question has to do with how is CISA working to ensure that emergency funding is not needed for something as basic as logging?
So it's important to think of security funding, ma'am, along two paths. The first is the funding that CISA needs to provide a foundation of security across the executive branch. And a second is the funding that each agency requests to modernize and further mature their own IT structures. And so certainly, as that director mentioned, we do consider the funding in the ARA to be a down payment to modernize federal cybersecurity and drive further progress. It is reasonable to anticipate that other federal agencies will request similar investments to improve their own enterprise cybersecurity. Now, certainly, we do hope that these sorts of investments will be built into baseline requests going forward. But we do recognize that this will be a long journey. It will be a long path to get federal cybersecurity to the point where it needs to be, given the sophistication of the adversaries targeting our networks. And we look forward to working with your committee in a deeply transparent way to understand that funding path and the end state that we're trying to collectively reach.
Okay. One of the major features of the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program has been to improve visibility into agency networks. Yet we continue to rely on data calls with agencies to answer the most basic questions, such as which agencies are still using Microsoft Exchange servers. How do we address this problem if the current CDM suite of tools does not provide enough visibility? Do we need to change our strategy, and will any of the $650 million on its way to CISA be used at least in part to improve this visibility?
Thank you, ma'am. So you'll recall from a prior question that CDM provides transparency at two levels, at the agency level and at the level of CISA. Even when we issue a directive or a data call today, agencies are still able to use their CDM tools and the transparency that they get at the agency level to respond to CISA. We are working with individual agencies to improve the fidelity of information that CISA is able to derive. And ma'am, to the second part of your question, investments through the ARA request will additionally improve both the coverage of more advanced tools through the CDM program and an additional infrastructure to help CISA analyze CDM data and derive information that we can use to get better fidelity into cybersecurity risks across federal civilian agencies.
Thank you. Mr. Fleshman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and gentlemen, thank you for a very insightful hearing. This has been extremely helpful to me, and I know to the other members of the subcommittee. With the impending passage of the next COVID relief bill, $1 billion is carved out for cybersecurity, with $650 million of that going towards CISA to help advance cyber protections. Do you feel this will have a demonstrable impact, or are we just barely buying down the risk? Or put another way, how much of a funding deficit are we in with respect to cyber protections, and what percentage of that is addressed with the supplemental funding? Thank you.
This investment will absolutely make a demonstrable impact in federal cybersecurity. At the same time, it is an incremental step. This will be a multi-year process, assuredly, across the 101 agencies in the federal civilian executive branch to ensure that we are able to provide the level of security that the American people expect. Now, CISA, of course, plays a core role in this, not only in detecting and responding to incidents, but also in providing shared services that agencies can increasingly use to raise their baseline of cybersecurity. And again, this will be a journey both for CISA and for the other 100 federal civilian agencies to move to a model where we are more quickly detecting adversary events and where we are moving to a more shared service, even centralized model where CISA is raising the baseline across the federal civilian executive branch. And we look forward to the ongoing dialogue with this committee to understand that long-term funding profile over time.
Thank you for that answer. By the way, Mr. Goldstein, I am also a former Fighting Illini. I saw you went to Urbana-Champaign. I'm a lot older than you. I graduated in '83, but I just noticed that in your credentials, so I thank you. The SolarWinds attack exploited a supply chain vulnerability, but what else do you currently see as the biggest risk or vulnerability to cybersecurity? And as a follow-up, what are the specific tactics or resources that CISA needs to have at its disposal to best combat this particular risk?
Sure. So, I think the probably gravest risk that CISA sees from a national standpoint is the risk of an adversary compromising industrial control systems that could cause life safety impact. It is deeply damaging and concerning when an adversary steals data or exposes the privacy of Americans or federal agencies. That is, of course, of grave concern, but it is a different degree of concern when an adversary could compromise a control system that could actually cause loss of life for our fellow Americans. The chairwoman mentioned in her opening statement the intrusion to a water facility in Baltimore, Florida. I think that incident, although not resulting in immediate harm, should be a clarion call for this country for the risk that we face from cyber intrusions into these critical systems. And CISA, in our role as the nation's lead agency for cybersecurity, are deeply focused on working with the industrial control system security to ensure to ensure that we are both understanding vulnerabilities in that community. Where applicable, we are helping the ICS community identify sophisticated threats, including through CISA's Cyber Sentry program, and we are working to incentivize increasing the baseline of cybersecurity across industrial control systems owners and operators so that we are seeing the use of modern technology to reasonably protect these critical systems.
Thank you very much. And again, Acting Director Wales and Director Goldstein, thank you for your testimony today. Madam Chair, thank you for holding this hearing. With that, I'll yield back.
Mr. Rutherford. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rupertsberger.
What, two names like that?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Okay. I just didn't have a chance to answer my question about the incident, how does the American Rescue Plan request support expanding the capability of what you need to do? Basically, bottom line, that's short term. You've said that all the way through. What, in more detail, if you can, where is the money? I think $650 million. Where is that going to be used by you? What is your priority to take that money to move forward? Because I believe this very strongly, that this is a serious issue of lack of funding and resources in what you all do. You can't do it all, and it's going to get worse instead of better. We have to accept the fact that cybersecurity is a major issue, and we, other than people who specialize and work in it, don't understand that. And there's no question we've got to deal with the issue of COVID, but we still have to move forward. So what are you going to do with the short-term money? Where your priority going to go? And then what ideas you have as far as moving forward in this big, massive issue that you're going to try to work with, but you just don't have the resources.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. So there are 4 key areas that we'll be able to make real progress in with the money requested in the ARA. The first is the deployment of detection sensors within federal agencies to increase our visibility into cybersecurity threats within agency environments and figure out adversary activity much quicker to minimize these kind of prolonged compromises that we've recently seen. The second, sir, to your point, is expanding our capacity for incident response and threat hunting, including moving to that proactive hunting model that I mentioned previously. The third is improving our capacity to conduct analysis of cybersecurity information coming into CISA to understand risks and threats across the executive branch. And then the fourth and the longest term imperative is progressing federal agencies to a more defensive network architecture. For example, using these zero trust principles where we're assuming that the network is permeable and focusing on protecting assets and accounts therein. Now, that is a longer term effort. To a broader question, sir, none of these activities will be fully actualized by the money in the ARA. So we are going to need longer term investment, both by CISA and by individual agencies across all 4 of these paths, as well as continuously reevaluating the risk and technology environment to make sure that our ongoing resources are commensurate with critical changes, as you noted, sir, in this deeply complex space.
Do you have a dollar amount there?
Sir, it is highly challenging to estimate the final dollar amount for just the reason that you noted.
I agree with you, and that amount will knock our socks off. There's no question.
That's a fair statement, sir.
And the last thing, I still have a little time. I believe that we really have to look at cybersecurity as even maybe independent of this committee and have a direct line to the president. This is so serious, just like we did with the new Space Force. But the threat we have, and what happened is indicative of what's going to happen in the future with Russia and China, and you have Iran, and we have had attacks with North Korea. And if we don't start taking this seriously, we're going to put all of our citizens in this country at severe risk. And so far, it's just been stealing information. But if we have a destructive attack, and which is starting to happen, and the threats, of shutting us down, we're going to be in a bad position as far as national security in our country, especially as it relates to the countries that are more involved in cybersecurity.
Sir, let me just add on that, and following up on Eric's point. We want to make sure that CISA and the entire whole of nation is prepared for significant cyber incidents. In many respects, the fact that the SolarWinds campaign targeted federal agencies and larger, more well-capitalized private sector companies, generally, was somewhat beneficial. If this had been a broad campaign targeting state and local governments or small and medium-sized businesses like the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities are facing, the challenges of them being able to sufficiently have the resources, skills, and abilities to remediate these problems would be magnified. So we need to look at additional ideas for how we provide support to state and local governments and small businesses as they look to recover from significant cyber incidents. There are ideas out there like those pushed by the Cyberspace Larum Commission for a Cyber Response and Recovery Fund. But we need additional approaches to make sure that the whole of nation can come together around significant cyber incidents and ensure we have the right capabilities in the right places to take the mitigative steps and build back networks even stronger.
Excellent point. Real back.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to tell you, Director, that was exactly where I wanted to go, was this whole of nation aspect that you were just speaking of. And to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Ruppersberger's point about in your response concerning the industrial control systems, that's where I see some of the greatest potential for loss of life. We have loss of security, through some of the federal systems. And one of the things that kind of, I understand your priority is going to be the federal agencies. And that's why when you answered concerning the $650 million in RAR, the American Rescue Act, ARA, I should say, when you answered, you focused on all the federal responses in like detection systems, expanding the response capabilities, analytics. And I understand that, but I'd really like to know currently what is the requests that are coming to CISA from state, local, and private industry, those industrial control systems that we spoke of, because that's where I see the greatest threat to loss of life. Dropping planes out of the sky, running trains into each other, poisoning water systems like we saw in Oldsmar. Those are the kind of things that equally concern. I don't want to say one is more important than the other, but they equally concern me. And I wonder, Dutch said it so well. I wonder how many people back home understand what he just said. That's what concerns me. And so are they reaching out for that assistance? Now, I can tell you, I just spoke with the Florida League of Cities yesterday, and this Oldsmar water plant was primary, well, not primary, but it was one of the major topics on their list to discuss. And we talked about community development block grants and those sorts of things because they understand now that they need to tighten up these cyber systems. Can you tell me that we have as much focus on what Dutch just spoke about as we do the federal side as well?
Yes, so let me just answer high level, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric to give you some of the details. So CISA has a lot of authority and responsibility to protect the federal civilian executive branch. And so SolarWinds has highlighted key gaps and vulnerabilities in our cybersecurity of .gov, and we needed to take aggressive action to address that. And that's why the ARA has that dedicated funding to make sure that we enhance our capacity to deal with vulnerabilities in an area where we have substantial responsibilities and authorities. That being said, we have a broad mission in cybersecurity, and industrial control systems is among our highest priorities for our broad cybersecurity mission. We released our strategic plan for addressing ICS cybersecurity last year, a unified plan that we worked across the interagency with. And this is certainly a significant thrust of our efforts. It's also a significant competency. We have a lot of deep expertise in industrial control system cybersecurity, which is a rare and precious talent that we have developed over time. But I want Eric to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives and ideas we have in this space.
Mr. Wells, if you could tell me, does that plan have a name? You mentioned it.
Yeah, it's called, it was called like the, no, I think it was the Industrial Control System Cybersecurity, a Unified Initiative, I believe is the title of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add, just to reiterate the core point, CISA is focused on the most critical national cybersecurity risks, and it is unequivocally the case that risks to industrial control systems are paramount among our concerns. And so there's really two main thrusts there that I would offer. The first is how CISA can directly support the community of entities that own and operate control systems. And this is through services like vulnerability assessment, proactive guidance, incident response, or even in some cases, the deployment of active sensing technologies across control systems to understand adversary threats. The second area, though, and the one where we hope to work with your committee and others, is how the US government can help raise the baseline of cybersecurity across entities that own and operate control systems, recognizing that many control systems may be operated by municipalities or rate cap utilities that may not be able to afford the best-in-class cybersecurity solutions that other private companies can. And so we also want to think creatively, working with Congress, on how we can collectively raise the bar for ICS cybersecurity across this country.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that, on those efforts. And thank you for all y'all do. With that, Madam Chair, I see my time's run out. I yield back.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me ask our guests to turn their focus to healthcare. In 2003, the federal government established the healthcare and public health sector as one of 16 critical infrastructure sectors in the U.S., recognizing that its security is essential to the economy, the national security, public health, and safety of the country. As our healthcare systems become more digitized, from electronic health records to connected medical devices, we've seen hacking and IT security incidents on the rise in healthcare as in other sectors. It's particularly worrisome during a pandemic, of course, when much of our healthcare information has been shifted online, including vaccine distribution management, other critical functions. So healthcare organizations, like lots of others, are struggling to defend their networks from data breaches. And I wonder if you could give us an update on your assessment of this sector and your efforts in this regard. Could you elaborate on some of the work that DHS, or for that matter, other partners, are doing to secure the healthcare system? How are you keeping up with the numerous emerging technologies in the medical sector? And then can you give us an estimate of the degree to which best practices and procedures are now known, publicized, in place for insurance plans, healthcare providers, payers to review how to best protect patient data? Are best practices, to what degree is there a consensus? To what degree is it publicly available and easily accessible to these stakeholders?
Sure. So I'll start, and I'd say without question, over the past year, since the early days of COVID, we very quickly recognized the importance of surging resources to the healthcare sector and related parts of the economy because of the criticality and fragility of these infrastructures in the midst of a global pandemic. We actually brought together a team, used some of the hiring authority in one of the earlier COVID supplemental packages to bring on additional capacity, additional expertise in the healthcare industry, and had sent them to work to improve the uptake on the cybersecurity services that we offer, and to come at them and offering all the capabilities that CISA has to bring, whether it's in our cyber domain, physical security, supply chain security, and so on. We have worked hard over the past year to increase the cybersecurity profile of this industry. We have seen through our efforts the speed at which this sector is patching vulnerabilities that we can see through external scans improve dramatically last year. And beginning when Operation Warp Speed stood up, we began to work very closely with that organization to provide the cybersecurity services that we have to the companies involved in the manufacture and distribution of the vaccine supply chain. That work continues today. We are still working. We're doing assessments. We're providing sensors on networks. We're providing overwatch of their IP space, working with the intelligence community. There is a lot of work designed to help provide an increased security posture around the healthcare sector. We think that this will pay long-term dividends beyond the pandemic in form of our relationship with the sector, their ability to utilize our resources, and their overall cybersecurity baseline. That being said, the healthcare industry is large, it's diverse. You've got small municipal hospitals that are not as well capitalized, and we are trying to find additional resources that can be provided. One good example, the organization that operates what we call the multi-state ISAC, that helps provide support to state and local governments. It operates on a cooperative grant from CISA. It operates a sensor network similar to our Einstein system for state and locals who sign up for it. But they made available for free to critical healthcare companies, usually for municipal authorities, to provide malicious domain blocking service quickly to companies at risk, and because of their criticality as part of the COVID response. And so we think that there is a whole community effort to address this problem, but it is one that is going to take a lot of work over a lot of years, given its size, its complexity, and the amount of help they may require.
What would you say about that whole community concept, to the extent to which some of these smaller and maybe less connected healthcare institutions, practitioners are fully aware of the threat? I mean, can we at least say now that the wake up call has occurred? There's a fuller awareness, a desire to adopt best practices, or do we still have some distance to go in that regard?
I would say that given the number of ransomware attacks that have hit hospitals, even in the midst of a pandemic, which is a deplorable, which is just deplorable in the case of these criminal organizations, has been a wake-up call. That being said, if you're a small hospital and you're not as well capitalized, you may not have the option. You may not have the resources to invest in the dedicated cybersecurity team and information security practices that are required for the threat that you may face. And so we need to think creatively about how do we give them the tools and capabilities they require to provide the level of security that is needed when you're protecting America's health and safety.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I just want to thank you for all the work that you do on this committee, as well as Ranking Member Fleischman. This is the one committee that I enjoy attending and participating in. Well, and my other one too, my Commerce, Justice, and Science. But the two best committees out of the Appropriations Committee. But again, I wanted to just thank Chairman Wells and Mr. Goldstein for being on today. There's so much to talk about, and I wanted to ask them, because I didn't, I should have. I talked about what keeps up, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. What causes you to have sleepless nights, gentlemen? If you don't mind sharing, if you can share a scenario or an example of a sleepless night because of a threat facing the Homeland.
So I'll just return back to a line that we were just on, which is the possibility of a cyber attack impacting a critical service or function that results in loss of life or harm to the American people. And this could be via a control system. It could be a ransomware attack at a hospital that results in the unavailability of critical services, as we've seen in other countries. And so it is really this transition of cyber attacks moving from a focus on stealing or accessing data, which is deeply concerning, but towards a cyber attack impacting the provision of a critical service, water, electricity, healthcare, upon which the American people depend. It is that transition that is deeply concerning and presents an urgent and emergent national risk.
So basically, you described what happened to Texas and in other cities in and around the Midwest because of weather last week. But what we're talking about, instead of weather, a natural disaster type scenario that we have no control over at all, there's probably a bad actor out there that can hit a keyboard and make something like this happen, or could make something like this happen if we don't safeguard and firewall our critical infrastructure.
That is certainly the risk that we must act urgently to address, correct?
Yeah, if you kind of tie that in with not only the cyber intrusions, but the stuff that's happening in the space domain, where a lot of our, let's say that economically we compete, but they're also possibly our adversaries in space, creating a bunch of ASAT technologies, and we know we are becoming even more dependent upon satellites for our day in, day out life, our financial systems, our phones, everything. Do you work with those other agencies to map out a plan, because if you go to the bank and you have no bank in your account, money in your account, and your phone doesn't work. I mean, we've seen over time that through fear and paranoia, it could cause a lot of trouble here in America. Are you concerned about something like that happening? And how are we I guess jointly working together and not having silos as we've had in the past in federal agencies, but sharing communication to protect all of us?
Yes, sir. So certainly, CISA works very closely with the Defense Department, private industry, other government partners on issues like space-based technologies that, as you note, are inherently reliant upon networking and the integrity of communications, and present increasingly a fundamental dependency to all manner of critical infrastructure. And so certainly we are deeply attuned to these sort of technological trends that are either emerging or have already manifested, how those technologies could be undermined by a cyber intrusion, and then working with the companies that are developing, manufacturing, deploying these technologies, making sure that wherever possible, security is built in by design on the front end.
And so let me just add, we've been meeting with the newly formed Space ISAC. So it is a conglomeration of companies involved in the space industry, have formed an information sharing and analysis center as a means to share critical information related to cybersecurity threats that could impact space systems or their related ground-based infrastructure. That is a new focus area. The last administration kicked it off. They had a space cybersecurity effort. And we think that it's critical that we continue to focus on these additional functions that we recognize are both vulnerable but absolutely essential to our way of life. And we have a lot of work, historical work in the GPS and PNT world that we'll call upon as we embark upon additional activity to support the companies involved in the space-based industry.
Look, thank you for that. I know my time's ticking down. Again, I just want to say I appreciate everything that you're talking about. And I know just as we've been focusing in space, instead of having one big satellite that could be taken out, we're trying to deaggregate our space footprint. So we have multiple satellites. I'm assuming there were some conversations about that on how do we do our electrical grids and things in the aftermath of our winter storm. But I'll just leave with this. And one of my colleagues mentioned, like, why aren't we taking this seriously? Obviously, this committee and the members on this committee are taking cyber very seriously. And I think a large number of the American people, if they weren't so distracted by the shenanigans and the games that basically their politicians are doing, how can we expect them to take this seriously when they don't even take us seriously? And I think that starts with fellow members of Congress, putting politics aside and focusing on the American people and solid policy. And again, we have unlimited wants with limited resources, and this committee has a big responsibility. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank your team for the work that you do. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a point with regards to the industrial systems. CISA really does need to put together a very comprehensive strategy with fund estimates and schedules to help the nation address the ICS risks, because we really would like to move very quickly in addressing this issue. So I just want to make that point. And I just have one more question that I would like to ask. The reconciliation bill also includes funding to help address federal agency IT modernization efforts through the General Services Administration's Technology Modernization Fund, or TMF. As a member of the TMF board, CISA will play a role in overseeing the execution of those funds. Can you speak to the current state of the federal government IT infrastructure and how it impacts our cybersecurity capabilities?
Certainly. So modernization and security are inherently interlinked, but that must be intentional. And so CISA plays a key role on the Technology Modernization Fund to ensure that critical new investments to ensure that federal IT is state of the art are conducted with security top of mind. And so even as the federal enterprise modernizes technology, to make sure that the federal workforce and the American people have access to the technology that they expect for the critical services delivered by each of our federal agencies, that those modernization efforts are conducted with security built in to some of the prior questions, to ensure that years from now, we don't look back and realize that we invested in technology that didn't have the appropriate security controls, the appropriate logging on down the line. Our goal is to make sure that as we modernize securely, so we're building in defenses from the ground up.
Thank you. I believe there are no more questions, so we're going to conclude this hearing. Acting Director Wales and Executive Assistant Director Goldstein, thank you so very much for your time and for helping us to think through these very, very difficult challenges. And we certainly appreciate your agency's transparency in working with the subcommittee and the interagency cooperation of the Cyber Unified Coordination Group. This has been a very, very informative hearing, and very much appreciate your being here. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security now stands adjourned.
Thank you.